That night, the police were sure a father was beating his daughter. I was sure he was the only chance she had. It all started way less dramatic. 3 a.m, the smell of fried bacon baked into my skin, and my one true wish in life, to get home and faceplant into my pillow. I'm Mia, 31, waitress in a 24-hour diner on the edge of Oak Ridge. Yes, I've got a degree in child psychology. Yes, I work where people think refill is a personality trait. This is America, honey. Dreams are financed by student loans and double shifts. I'd already turned into the alley between the car wash and an old brick building when I heard someone sniffle. Honestly, my first thought was, please, not another drunk college kid. I was already mentally switching into calm voice mode and preparing to call an Uber and an ambulance when in the weak streetlight I saw that this was not a college kid. It was a child. Little girl, maybe 5 or 6. Pink hoodie, hair down, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at me with eyes like a terrified animal. Clean sneakers, decent clothes, and absolutely alone. Hey! I crouched down, trying not to look like a kidnapper. Hi, are you lost? She flinched, hunched her shoulders, and wrapped herself tighter. Not a word, just breathing, way too fast for a body that small. Somewhere deep inside me, something clicked in a bad way. That familiar cold in your chest when you're little again. Your drunk mom is screaming behind the door, and you're trying to breathe so quietly she forgets you exist. That's the cosmic joke. People who most wanted to be invisible as kids grow up and run straight into let me help everyone professions. Some become doctors, some social workers. I picked therapy. On paper. In reality, I was standing in an alley with a stranger's kid who smelled like fear and asphalt. Look, it's chilly out here, I said, more businesslike now. How about we at least stand up? My diner's right on the corner. It's bright, it's warm, they have hot chocolate. I won't touch you if you don't want that, okay? Nothing. Her fingers just got whiter on that hoodie. I automatically scanned around us. Empty. No adults. No cars. Windows dark. That special moment when you realize, yeah, you're the adult, and you either step in or spend the rest of your life replaying how you walked away. I sighed and pulled out my phone. First person I dialed was Tessa. Tess is my friend and the official adult in Adult World, licensed clinical social worker with local child protective services. In other words, the person who sees this kind of kid every day, and this kind of mom, like mine. Mia? Her voice came through sleepy, but the kind of sleepy that can snap awake in half a second. You know what time it is? 3:07. Listen, I found a kid in an alley. Little girl, maybe 5, alone, scared out of her mind. Not talking. The pause went ice cold. Did you already call 911? I called you first, I admitted, hearing how dumb it sounded as I said it. She's sitting on the ground. She's shaking. I don't want to leave her alone. Mia. Tess switched to the tone she uses for especially stubborn officials. Right now you're split between your childhood trauma and the criminal code. You take that kid somewhere bright, you stay with her, and you call 911. Tell them you're willing to be a support person until CPS gets there. I'll wake up our on-call social worker and probably a detective. And Mia, don't disappear before they arrive. I'm not the disappearing type, I muttered. You know that. Exactly why I love you. Call 911. She hung up. Perfect. I hung up too, on my hope of just minding my own business. I looked back at the girl. Okay, kiddo, I'm about to do something very loud and official, I said, lifting my phone. But I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere, okay? She didn't answer, but when I slowly held out my hand, after a long hesitation, she did stand up, very carefully, like any movement might blow something up. We made it to the corner. The Sunrise Diner neon glowed over an empty parking lot. Through the glass, I could see our cook, Marco, scrubbing the grill, and Olivia, the other waitress, taping extra hard on the tip jar. I sat the girl down in the back booth, the one we save for breakups and people who cry on the phone. I called 911 and went down the list. Location, approximate age, alone, not talking, looks scared, possible bruises. The dispatcher confirmed the address, asked me not to leave and not to grill the kid for info about her house parents. It was kind of funny. We all know the phrase trauma-informed from TikTok and then immediately forget kids don't need a full interrogation from every adult in the vicinity. "I'm gonna grab you some hot chocolate," I told the girl when I hung up. "If you don't like hot chocolate, I'm still bringing it." She gave the tiniest nod, almost invisible. Olivia lifted an eyebrow when she saw us. "Who's that?" "Santa hit the wrong address," I said through my teeth. I called 911. "CPS is on it. Can you make me a kid-size something hot and very sugary?" "Sure." Olivia glanced at the girl, her face softening. "Oh, God." When the girl reached for the mug, her sleeve slid back, and I saw it. A bruise, yellow-blue, like a bad watercolor of a continent covering half her forearm. Not a bike fall bruise, more like somebody held onto her very hard, and it had nothing to do with hugs. My stomach twisted. "Hey," I said gently, "can I give you a different sweatshirt? I've got a spare in my locker. This one's kinda dirty at the bottom." It actually wasn't too bad, but I needed to see the rest, and so would the doctors. In the employee restroom, I pulled my old black diner sweatshirt out of my locker. The girl stood in the middle of the room, frozen. "I'm not going to touch you without permission," I said, mentally reciting the manual. "You can take off your hoodie yourself and put this on. I'll just set it on the sink, okay?" She nodded. Slowly took off the hoodie. I tried very hard to breathe evenly. Her stomach, ribs, shoulder, covered in shadows. Different colors, different stages of healing. Somebody big had been signing their name on that small body. Not with fists, palms, belt, something wide. And I knew that handwriting. My mom's name was Nicole. Her favorite parenting tools were a bottle and a belt. Our trailer burned down when I was 9. Neighbor Pete dragged me out through a window while the fire trucks were still on their way. Nicole didn't get to drag herself out that time. That's how I learned the world can hurt you and save you at the same time. 2 months later, my grandma on my dad's side showed up, Claudia. She took me to New York, to a therapist, to real food, to sheets that didn't smell like cigarettes. I spent years learning how to breathe without counting the steps to the door. My therapist said I'd make a great child psychologist. You'll understand them from the inside. Funny how right he was. In theory. In practice, I turned into a night shift waitress because the system where I was supposed to save kids turned out to be one giant air quote. The girl pulled on my sweatshirt. It was a little big, but that was better, covered almost everything. "Perfect," I said, even though everything inside me was screaming. "Let's go. We're about to be visited by some people with flashing lights." The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. 10 minutes is forever when you're a scared kid. For a waitress on shift, it's 2 broken glasses and 1 argument with a customer about whether sauce is included. 2 officers, a man and a woman, came in wearing that expression I know from miles away. "We have no idea what we're walking into, but we're already braced for the worst." "You the one who called?" the woman asked. "Yeah." I nodded toward the girl. "Found her alone in the alley? She's not talking. She's clinging to me like I'm the last safe object in the universe." The girl had already grabbed a fistful of my sweatshirt. "We've got an ambulance on the way," the male officer said. "They'll check her out. You can ride with her if she clearly doesn't want to let you go. You'll have to answer some questions at the station later." "I love answering questions," I said dryly. "I even got a degree for that." The ambulance pulled up right after the cops. A paramedic, a woman with soft eyes, crouched down to the girl's level. "Hey, sweetie." My name's Kate. I'm just gonna make sure you're okay, all right? And your, friend?" She looked at me. "Mia," I said. "I found her." "Mia can ride with you if you want," Kate told the girl. "She can stay right by you." The girl's grip on my sleeve tightened. That was an answer. They took us to the children's wing of the city hospital. A few more adults joined the party, pediatrician, nurse, and a woman in a sensible but warm cardigan, a social worker. About half an hour later, a new figure appeared in the doorway. Guy in a blazer without a tie, tired face. "Detective." "Detective Miller." He flashed his badge. "Oak Ridge PD." "Mia," I introduced myself. "Waitress and part-time emotional support animal." The social worker, Sarah, let out a tiny snort. The detective did not. "She hasn't said a word?" he asked. "One nod, 2 sighs, and 1 attempt to climb into my ribcage," I said. "But hey, that's progress." "We've already put her info in the missing kids system," Sarah said. "And," she looked at me, "your name is familiar. You're friends with Tessa Anderson?" "If she still calls me that, then yeah," I said. "She also asked me to tell you this wasn't her fault." "Tessa's already looped in," Sarah nodded. "She's on her way here." The doctor finished his initial exam and asked me to stay close while they did a few scans and blood work. The girl, still nameless on the chart, held my hand like I was the only anchor in this bright, white, too loud world. "Hey," I said quietly when we were finally left alone for a minute. "You know your name. I'm sure you do. If you tell it to me, I'll call you by it. If not, I'm gonna call you Sunshine, and in America that sounds kinda weird sometimes." She was silent for a long time. Then she whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Kristen?" "Hi, Kristen," I said. "I'm Mia. We've already met, but you kinda skipped introductions." For a moment, the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Sarah came back with a sheet of paper and a box of markers. "Kristen," she said gently, "sometimes it's easier for kids to draw than to talk. If you want, you can draw what's going on with you, how you feel. It doesn't have to be pretty, just how it is." Kristen looked at me like asking for permission. I nodded. She took a marker. Her fingers still shook, but the lines on the page were steady. First, she drew a little girl, stick legs, circle head. Then, towering over her, a huge woman with crooked teeth and green hair. Over her head, Kristen scribbled a sort of crown and wrote in messy kid letters, "Witch." Next to the witch, she drew a tall man without a face, holding something black. Farther away, off to the side, she drew a figure on a horse. Underneath, Dad. I didn't need to be a practicing therapist to read that. "You're very brave," I said quietly. "That's a really clear picture." I handed the paper to Sarah. She exchanged a look with Miller. "So, we're looking for a witch and the boyfriend," Miller said darkly. "And a dad on a horse." "He's obviously not in the same category as the first two," I pointed out. "If he was a threat, he'd be standing next to the witch, not riding in from afar." Miller looked at me like I'd just started reading his mind. "You're a psychologist?" he asked. "On paper. In reality, I carry trays and argue with people about the doneness of their steak," I said. "But yeah, I remember the basics." He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "All right, let's hope the dad on a horse exists outside the drawing." About 15 minutes later, he came back with a different look on his face, somewhere between tense and relieved. "We've got an Ethan Cole," he said. "Reported his 6-year-old daughter, Kristen, missing 3 hours ago. Full custody. Mother, Margaret, had her parental rights terminated for physical abuse and neglect. We've got reports, photos, court records. They were driving from Texas to New York, stopped near Oak Ridge for the night. In the motel parking lot, the girl ran after a cat. He looked away for a second. You know the rest. He's on his way. I felt something unclench inside me. You still looking at him as a suspect? I asked. For now, yes, Miller said honestly. As long as I'm staring at a kid covered in bruises, I don't get to close the suspect list, but... He glanced at the drawing. This does change the angle. Ethan Cole showed up 20 minutes later, tall, dark-haired, unshaven, in a wrinkled t-shirt. The standard look for a man who's spent too many hours behind the wheel and in a police station. They brought him in through a different door, into a separate room. I only saw him through the glass, a guy pacing like a caged animal, gripping his phone, with a lawyer somewhere on speaker, while the detective ran his standard script. Kristen was in the playroom with me, with the drawing and a generic hospital teddy bear. Sarah had told her dad was here, but people with notebooks had to talk to him first. They always talk first, Kristen whispered. Then Dad gets mad. You think he's mad at you? I asked. She shook her head. At them. That was actually good news. After a while, the door opened again. Sarah peeked in. Kristen, she said gently. Your dad's here. Do you want to see him? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She launched herself out of the room. I stood up to follow. Ethan had just enough time to look up before a small missile in my black sweatshirt hit him at about 25 miles an hour. She wrapped herself around him like she never planned to let go again. He froze. Then his arms snapped shut around her, and he buried his face in her hair. I'm not a big fan of words like abyss, but whatever flashed across his face for a second looked a lot like one. Hey, Peanut, he breathed. God, I thought... His voice cracked. Miller stood nearby pretending this was just another item on his checklist. It wasn't working. Ethan, he reminded him, we still need to finish our conversation. I'll do whatever you want, Ethan rasped, still holding on. Just, please don't take her away. Kristen clung harder. Sarah stepped in. Okay, she said in that trained, calm voice. Here's what we're going to do. Ethan, you come with me and Detective Miller to the office and we finish up. Kristen stays here with Mia, who, she glanced at me, is officially a support person. No foster placement tonight, unless we get a reason to consider you a threat. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., both of you come to my office. Got it? Ethan nodded. Kristen's fingers dug into his shirt. I'm not going anywhere, I told her. I'll be right here waiting while you're with them. Promise. She looked up at me, then at her dad, then back at me. You'll come with us? She asked. As far as the law will let me, I said, which was the only honest answer. Miller and Sarah took Ethan to the office. Kristen came back to the playroom with me. She sort of played with plastic animals, but stayed closer to me than my own shadow. About 40 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, Ethan looked no better, but calmer, the kind of calm people get when they've run out of emotional fuel. We're done for tonight, Miller said. They're going home. Home, in his mouth, meant motel. Or wherever. Sarah added, Ethan, you've got full custody, confirmed by the court. CPS sees no reason to place Kristen in foster care tonight, as long as you stay in contact, cooperate, and show up tomorrow. She turned to me. And Mia, officially, we can't make you do anything. Unofficially, Kristen has made it very clear she feels safe with you. If you're able to spend the night with them, that would help. At that point, my brain started flipping through my internal schedule. Shifts, bills, the size of my couch. Somewhere on the page where my internal code lives, there's been a line for years. If a kid is terrified, deal with everything else later. I've got a 1-bedroom, I said. 1 decent mattress and 1 IKEA couch that's seen more drama than most therapists. I can give them my bed. Ethan looked at me like I'd just offered not lodging, but a new universe. "Are you sure?" he asked. "You don't even know me." "I know how your kid ran to you," I said. "That's enough for one night." My apartment is on the 3rd floor of an old building where everything creaks, but at least nobody throws parties on Wednesday at 3 a.m. Inside, it's the usual used couch, wobbly kitchen table, and a cat named Tiger I rescued off a supermarket parking lot. Tiger strutted out to meet us, tail straight up, like he owned the deed to the place. "This is how it started," Ethan muttered when Kristen, seeing the cat, finally let go of him for a second and followed the striped tail. "She saw a huge orange cat in the parking lot and decided the world is a safe place where you can run after cats," I finished. "Terrible, really." We tucked Kristen into my bed. I found an old college t-shirt for her, Future of Psychology printed across the front, which really tied the night together, irony-wise. Ethan took a shower, and then we sat in my kitchen with cheap tea bags and discount cookies. "Margaret wasn't always a monster," he started without any warm-up. At first everyone's normal. Or good at pretending." I nodded. I knew. He told me his story, how he fell in love with a girl with sad eyes and too loud laughter who grew up with an alcoholic mom and swore she'd never be like that. How the first year after Kristen was born was almost okay, how slowly the bottle showed up in their kitchen again. Evenings. Then to relax. Then always. "I was working 12-hour shifts," he said. "I'd come home and not understand why my kid had bruises. She'd say, 'I fell.' Then I started noticing she flinched when her mother came near. I called CPS. They came, talked to Margaret. She cried, promised she'd fix everything. You know that script." I did. The "I'll change" speech is the favorite genre of people who don't change anything. "Then there was a night the neighbor called the police," Ethan went on. "Margaret threw Kristen on the floor. CPS took her into emergency foster care. I spent 3 months in court proving I wasn't the same as her. Eventually, the judge terminated Margaret's rights, gave me full custody, but Kristen stopped talking. She just shut down. We started therapy. I found a clinic in New York that said they could help. I quit my job in Texas, we packed the car, started driving across half the country, and in some crappy parking lot I got distracted by a screaming text from my boss, looked away for 30 seconds, and when I turned back she was gone." He went quiet. The kitchen felt very small. Somewhere in the living room, Tiger was knocking something over. "You did what a lot of people never do," I said. "You called CPS. You went to court. You took your kid out of there. Most guys in your shoes keep pretending they don't know what's going on at home." "Tell that to the detective," Ethan snorted. "All he saw in my eyes was another dad taking it out on his kid." "They've been burned too," I shrugged. "Otherwise they wouldn't work that job. We've all got our scars." I could have told him about Nicole, about the trailer, about Pete, about how Grandma Claudia drove me to New York and my first therapist taught me that crying isn't weakness, it's a biological function. But the night was already overloaded with someone else's pain. "What about you?" he asked. "You clearly know what you're doing. Why aren't you in an office like Sarah's?" "I tried," I said. "Worked at a school, at a clinic. Everywhere, I was writing reports more than listening to kids. I realized I was documenting trauma more than helping anyone through it. So I went where expectations are honest. In a restaurant, people want coffee, a steak, and for you not to forget their sauce. Nobody pretends you can fix the whole system." "Well, tonight you fixed something very real," he said. "If it wasn't for you." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, 2 adults with shattered illusions, drinking cheap tea from mismatched mugs. The schedule for my shifts was pinned to the wall, My electric bill lay on the table, and in the next room, a 6-year-old who'd seen way too much in her life was sleeping soundly. And somehow, it all felt right. Kristen woke up the next morning glued to both of us, one hand on me, one on her dad. We went to CPS like we'd promised. Sarah asked another dozen questions, wrote up a safety plan, noted that Kristen was clearly attached to both adults, shows signs of trauma but also strong recovery potential. Yeah, I read reports automatically. Occupational hazard. Then my regular life snapped back. Night shifts, coffee, people arguing about an $8 bill like their mortgage depended on it. For a while, the whole Kristen situation felt like some weird dream. Until exactly a week later, in the middle of the dinner rush, the door opened and I saw them. He was in a clean button-down, actually rested, still tired around the eyes but without that abyss. She was in a light blue dress with neat braids and a wristband hiding the last of the old bruises, and a smile. A real one. "Got a family reunion out front," Olivia murmured behind my shoulder. "You taking that table?" I was already walking. Kristen saw me first. For a second, she stared like she wasn't sure I was real, then launched herself at me just like she had at her dad that night. "Mia!" Her voice was louder than anything I'd heard from her in the hospital. "I missed you!" If you want to know the weirdest feeling in the world, it's this. A kid who went through all of that telling you she missed you. Not her therapist, not a doctor, not a social worker. A waitress at a cheap diner. "I missed you too," I said honestly, hugging her back. Ethan walked over a little slower, carefully, like grown-ups do when they're afraid to spook something fragile. "We're moving to New York next week," he said. "Clinic agreed to take Kristen into their program. I already found a job. But before that," he hesitated. "We wanted to stop by and say thank you." "Our coffee still sucks," I said. "So this is a bold move." He smiled. "Kristen wanted to show you something," he said. She didn't wait for a cue. She pulled a sheet of paper from her backpack. Another drawing. Same little girl. Same horse. Dad. And another figure standing next to the horse, in jeans with a ponytail. Over that figure, in bumpy kid letters, it said Mia. "Now the prince has a helper," Kristen said seriously. "And the witch." She paused, thinking. "The witch has a problem now." I felt my throat tighten. This is where I really regret not being the kind of therapist who can say something beautifully profound. I only know how to bring people coffee and sometimes stay when everyone else leaves. "Sounds like a fair universe," I said. Ethan took a breath like he was about to jump into cold water. "We were thinking," he started. "We don't know anyone in New York. Kristen doesn't have anyone except me. And you," he looked straight at me, "you don't owe us anything. But if you ever get tired of arguing over stakes, you've got the degree, you've got the gift, and you've got a little girl who thinks you're her rescuer." He stopped, like he'd scared himself with his own boldness. "And you're offering me what exactly?" I asked. "To move to New York, dive back into the system, and do part-time fairy godmother duty for your princess? I'm offering you..." He lost the thread for a second. "I'm offering you a chance to think about it. And maybe one day walk into that clinic not carrying a tray, but wearing a badge that says Mia Cole, child psychologist." I snorted. "Hold up. Cole? I'm not saying tomorrow," he said quickly. "Or ever. I just..." He spread his hands helplessly. "Sometimes you find someone in an alley. Sometimes in a station. Sometimes behind a counter like this." I didn't have a ready-made answer. Not as a therapist, not as a waitress, not as a person who still counts how many steps to the exit. I just took the pencil from his hand, and under Kristen's drawing I wrote, "See you in New York." Kristen studied the words carefully. "You're gonna come?" she asked. I looked at Ethan, at her, at my counter, at the ticket line hanging in the kitchen window. I can promise you one thing. I'm never walking past when it comes to your story again. The rest? We'll see. She nodded, satisfied. Like that was the best contract she'd ever signed. If you made it all the way here and you're still waiting for a moral, here it is. Sometimes the system isn't abstract CPS, courts, detectives, and clinics. Sometimes the system is a waitress who doesn't walk past a kid in an alley at 3 a.m. A detective who actually looks at a crayon drawing. A social worker who doesn't send a child to foster care on autopilot. A father who refuses to pretend he doesn't see bruises. Each of us is one tiny gear in this weird machine called life in America. And sometimes you're the gear that keeps someone else from finally coming apart. Now your turn. What would you do if you found a kid alone in an alley at night, covered in bruises and not saying a word? Tell me in the comments. And yeah, if you ever see a waitress named Mia in New York, don't forget to tip her well.